Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to celebrate the Union. If there is anyone who objects to this union, speak now, or forever hold his Stop right there. Really, Al? This is what you dragged us halfway across the country for? I'm sorry, do I know you? Chris, ever since I laid eyes on you in the first Captain America, I knew we were fated to unite. And nothing was going to stop me from reaching 911, except that. Get off of me! Guys, help me out here! You know this guy? No, we have no association with him. Yeah, he kind of kidnapped us. Real funny, guys. No, get off me! Chris, please! We're supposed to be together! Please! Oh god, that suit was a rental! That damn nightmare again.
Get up, Roger! Get that door open! You got nowhere to go!
Disclaimer, the majority of this video was made during early to mid-February of 2025, hence the inaccuracies you might see as of publication. But, with that aside, let's begin. Hey guys, it's the Eliminator speaking. Now, I know I said I wanted to talk about more original stuff this year, but I just couldn't pass up another opportunity to talk about my boy, Steve Rogers. And plus, with the fourth movie on the way, I thought it would be as good a time as any to talk about what many people consider to be the best Captain America film. So, without further ado, let's begin. When making the sequel, there were a lot of things that you had to consider. You couldn't make another period piece because Steve was already brought to the 21st century at the end of the first movie. Not only that, but during his tenure as Cap back in the 40s, he spent all of his time exclusively fighting Hydra and the Nazis. So it's not like there were many other things he was doing at the time that you could mine for storylines. Not only that, but if you tried to do a Captain America story in the modern day, it would be a lot more complicated because there wouldn't be a very clear good and evil enemy to fight, given how much the political climate would have changed since then. As a result, the first movie's director didn't return and was instead replaced with two new directors who go on to direct every Cap film following this, as well as the last two Avengers movies. Though the first movie's writers were still kept on board, though that was probably the only thing that stuck around from the first movie, as come 2014, audiences would be introduced to a new version of Captain America with a new style, new tone, and most importantly, new sensibilities. So, with that said, let's see how the characters fare in this movie. Yeah, they're a lot better this time around. So, let's get right to it, starting with Black Widow. Personally, I think this is her best appearance in the MCU. Outside of the ensembles, it never really felt like they knew what to do with her, and even in the ensembles, she never felt like she was at the forefront compared to everyone else. As a result, when she wasn't a part of the team, it kind of felt like she might as well not exist. But her presence in this movie works really well, given that they were trying to go for more of a political thriller with an espionage spy tone. Obviously, you'd have the spy character appear in this one. Now, getting back on topic, Black Widow is basically a foil for Steve in this movie. Where Steve has a very black and white, straightforward view of everything, she's able to see a lot of the deeper complexities, and is a bit more willing to do the more ambiguous things. It makes sense given her past and everything that she was doing before she joined S.H.I.E.L.D. that she'd have these views. But at the same time, I like that they don't use that modern cynicism, as well as the potential jadedness, as a way of stepping on Steve and his values. The two coexist. And while we're on the topic of Steve, I definitely think he's just as charming as ever. We see right from the jump that he's doing things to adjust to the modern world and is actually managing to get along with people really well. We see him striking up a conversation with Sam after the two finish jogging, and when Black Widow comes to pick him up for a mission, he's pretty fun with her too. And even in his interactions with characters where he's on shakier ground with, like Nick Fury or Alexander Pierce, he's still able to be cordial and likable towards them. And honestly, I gotta commend Steve's respect here. The first movie kinda showed us that he had some amount of respect for women, and that continues here, but I really gotta commend his respect for minorities. Redheads are a demographic that is sorely lacking in proper respect from the general public, along with any reasons to actually respect them. So he's really taken one for the team here. But in all seriousness, there's a lot more I'd like to say about Steve.
But I mustn't tell you any more, or I shall spoil the story.
So let's move on. Sam Wilson, aka Falcon, is a welcome addition to Captain America's inner circle. Right from his introduction with him and Steve running laps near the Washington Monument, we're really endeared to their relationship. And despite not being introduced to each other on screen, I feel like they do a really good job of selling us on the fact that they're friends. Funnily enough, the year that this movie released, in 2014, was also the same year that Sam in the comics became Captain America. And before you ask, yes, I will get to that movie. Besides that, I like how Sam is also depicted as sort of a counselor for former soldiers, helping them to overcome the traumas of war and to some extent readjust to their new lives. And it makes sense that a guy like that would be friends with Steve, given what the previous movies put him through. I also like how he's willing to jump back into the action when he learns about the whole plot line. Like, there was a very real chance that if he failed, could have swept his death under the rug. But no, he chooses to jump in because he sees that Steve is in trouble. Steve doesn't even want him there, and he still chooses to go along with it, which in my opinion shows just how deserving he is of the mantle. After that, we have Nick Fury, and I don't even have to argue that this is his best appearance in the MCU. Fury's always had that sort of aura in the previous movies where, despite being on the good guy's side, you don't always know if you can fully trust him, which this movie almost immediately flips on its head. After a major shootout in the streets, Fury is basically having to maneuver around everything and everyone, to the point where he even has to fool people on the same side as him. Just everything he says happens to ooze this aura, that he knows something you don't, or that you're powerless against him, even the scenes where he isn't powerful. And before you ask, yes, I think the Captain Marvel retcon is dumb. I'm not arguing about this. After that, we have the movie's villain, Alexander Pierce, and his enforcer, the Winter Soldier. Now, the Winter Soldier doesn't have a ton to him. He serves as more of a plot device, and mostly exists to look cool during the fight scenes. Now, Pierce is actually pretty interesting. A lot of times with Marvel movies, you'll have the very powerful enforcer, and then you'll just have a generic guy in a suit who's the actual villain. But Pierce actually feels very entertaining. Not in a, oh, he's funny way, but that he's kind of the anti-Nick Fury. Nick Fury is very cold, stoic, and it's hard to tell whether or not you should trust him. Pierce genuinely is untrustworthy, but he's also friendly and somewhat charismatic. And while there's definitely more I'd like to say about his personality, I feel like this joke is getting old. So, let's move on to the story. Alrighty, with the characters squared away, let's move on to the story for Captain America the Winter Soldier. As always, spoilers are involved for the movie, so if you haven't seen it yet, go and watch it. But if you're at this point, you probably have, or you just don't care. So, let's begin. In Captain America the Winter Soldier, Steve finds himself doing better to acclimate to his new surroundings, after being released from the ice and later becoming an Avenger, though he finds his ideals clashing with those of others, as he deems S.H.I.E.L.D.'s new methods for national security to be too extreme, with his suspicions growing when S.H.I.E.L.D. enforcers are sent to attack him, turning him into a fugitive of the law. After doing a bit of digging, Steve discovers that the Nazi splinter group Hydra had infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. not long after his disappearance, and have secretly been planning to create a new world order right under the noses of everyone else, with help from their mysterious new enforcer, the Winter Soldier. Worse still, Steve learns that the Winter Soldier was actually his old friend Bucky, who, after falling off the train, was found and experimented on by Hydra, being brainwashed in order to do their dirty work. So, with the help of Black Widow, Nick Fury, and newcomer Falcon, Steve sets out to stop Hydra once and for all, in order to prevent a potential new global conflict. You already know that Winter Soldier is a great MCU movie, but one of the things I personally think makes it good is the fact that it improves upon a lot of the ideas from the first movie. For example, Steve's beliefs are challenged when he sees S.H.I.E.L.D.'s more intense methods of maintaining national security, and even before learning the truth about Hydra, he's forced to go behind their backs in order to do digging of his own. The side characters go from simply scoffing at Steve's idealism to having him lead the charge when it's time for them to take out Hydra, with their views clearly being changed by how Steve approaches each of the events that occurs. While many of the grunts working for Hydra are clearly just goons, their leaders are completely different. But Red Skull was basically just an evil Nazi. Alexander Pierce feels like an actual force with actual goals. Earlier in the movie, Nick Fury mentions how Pierce actually turned down the Nobel Peace Prize, stating that peace is not an achievement to be handed to someone, but is a responsibility, a way of life to be maintained. And Pierce's own motives track. He wants to bring order to the world. He wants to create some semblance of peace and, to some extent, freedom. However, he views the only way of doing this being by having eyes on everyone, so that he can stomp out any problem before it happens, along with any opposition. You can understand the goal he wants to achieve, but you can also disagree with him due to the fact that he's trying to use fascist ideals in order to achieve it. I said this earlier, but I want to reiterate the point. What I love is that this challenges Steve's beliefs, and to some extent it challenges the viewer's opinions. Obviously, holding a gun to everybody's head isn't a good way to protect the people of the country, because of just how easy it would be for certain people to abuse that kind of system. The movie doesn't even need to pose any hypotheticals, because that's literally the whole plot of the story. At the same time though, there are threats out there where the response from the government pales in comparison to what would have happened had it been prevented from the start. Especially nowadays when it feels like anyone can be a threat, and those that do get exposed have turned out to have existed for much longer than we thought, just in more subtle forms. But if we're being honest, stuff like this is a slippery slope, and I am not the qualified person to talk about it. But getting back to Steve, something I really like, again, is how he's faced with all of this. Yeah, he had been butting heads with S.H.I.E.L.D., but again, that was more of just a disagreement they seem to have from time to time. But now it's put into perspective once you realize that it's been corrupt from basically the beginning. Remember, S.H.I.E.L.D. was basically being established back in the 1940s. Ironically, Steve had been working for the bullies he had hated so much the whole time, and nobody knew it. Though personally, I'd say my favorite thing about this is how Steve responds to all the information. Yeah, he's torn up about it, he's bothered by the fact that he's basically been doing the bad guy's dirty work, similar to how Bucky is, but in the end, Steve does the right thing. He mentions that the price of freedom is high, and in this case, it's talking about standing up to the establishments that might have more power than you, or dismantling establishments that have already been in place for years. Admittedly though, my one issue with the whole thing is that it feels like everything is kind of wrapped up too quickly, with Pierce being killed, Hydra being stopped, and all their co-conspirators getting arrested. And on top of that, I kind of wish that Hydra hadn't returned to some extent, and that more so their tools were being repurposed by other people, because in real life, governments can tend to have their own agendas, and so showing that would be a more interesting and nuanced approach to it. But I get to some extent why they did that, even if I don't agree with it. But politics aside, something else I really have to commend the movie for is its pacing. There's always a sense of forward momentum, with each event feeling like it builds towards the next one. So even if you had the plot twist of Hydra being spoiled for you, you still have to give them credit because it feels like a natural development. I already mentioned how I felt kind of mixed on the return of Hydra, but I also have to dock points for the lack of shirtless Chris Evans in this one. I mean, what engagement I lost in the story of the first one, I still had because, you know, we have such an attractive lead to follow. But I don't know why this movie feels so inclined to cover him up. I mean, there's plenty of shots of his face, if you're into that, but everyone has a face in this movie. But even then, Steve doesn't really top that list, as I'd say that honor goes to Samuel L. Jackson. I don't know if he's got some dude locked up who he just periodically drains the life from, but he's doing really good at maintaining a complexion. But other than that, I'd say we're done with the story. So, let's wrap up the video. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments section. What do you like about Captain America Winter Soldier? What do you feel it improved upon over the first movie? And what do you feel it did worse? Also, as a bonus question, tell me, are you excited for Captain America Brave New World? As always, subscribe today to join the A-list, and have a great day. Bye!